This is the Gaggia E24, to my view, the best version of all times, and it's not only the brass boiler. There's another smart technical detail that was a nice surprise for me and nobody's talking about. So stick with me because I did several tests, collected a lot of data, and I think I have many interesting stuff to share with you. Before this one, my favorite models were the versions pre-2014 because they all had a solenoid valve, the adjustable brass OPV, and the rocker switches. However, the dispersion plate and the boiler were made in aluminum. After that, there was a moment that they added the stainless steel boiler, however they removed the solenoid valve. And for me this is a kind of a deal breaker. And there were other minor bad decisions in my opinion, like the rocker switches that were replaced by push buttons that tended to stick, and the OPV that was replaced by the plastic one, more fragile, not adjustable, that you need to replace the spring. Not so difficult to modify, but Gaggia is saving what, 10 euros maybe? And then when people modify, sometimes they break the OPV because it's plastic or they have leakages. So this is the kind of saving that doesn't make much sense to me. Then in 2023 we had the famous boiler gate, and for those who are not aware, Gaggia decided to introduce a new boiler made in aluminum but coated with a material similar to the Teflon to avoid the scaling and galvanic corrosion. However, this coating started to flake off, and they had to replace machines and boilers. It was a big damage to their reputation, and they decided to switch back to the full aluminum without the coating. And finally, in the end of 2024, they moved to the full brass boiler and group head. But not only that, and we'll get there. Of course, this machine is not perfect. It has, for example, the eco mode that will shut down your machine after about 15 minutes. And the first thing that I did was the power switch mod, following the instructions in the Gaggia web page. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to do all the measurements that I wanted. But even if you don't make experience like I do, 15 minutes is often a bit short for the hobbyists. Another point is that it is still tight to place your cup and scale under the double spout portafilter without the low drip tray mod. And the OPV is still the plastic one, delivering 15 bar in Europe, 9 bar in the US. I don't know why this difference, I don't know why they don't commercialize in Europe with the 9 bar spring. However, it's an easy mod, you can just replace the spring and you will be fine. By the way, I'll test some AliExpress cheap springs and measure the real pressure that is delivered. This and other mods for a stock Gaggia Classic will be detailed in my next videos. So if you want to know if it's worth improving the performance of your machine at lower costs, this is all this channel is about. So subscribe to receive the notifications. But back to the brass boiler. This is what initially attracted me, for many reasons that I'm going to detail one by one. The first reason is what they call galvanic or bimetallic corrosion. And what's this? When you have two different materials, for example, an aluminum boiler and a brass group head, those two different materials will behave as cathode and anode, and you will have electrons being donated one to the other. This will create small holes, increasing holes in this interface between the two materials, and at some point your boiler may leak. Is the only solution a full brass or stainless steel boiler? No. Some people cut a very thin, less than 1 mm food grade silicone sheet and place between the boiler and the group head. But, and there's always a but, this will not prevent the scaling that will build up much quicker in an aluminum boiler, and this is intrinsic to the material. So the only solution is changing the boiler, and this boiler will be available. Some people bought, right now it seems to be out of stock, and they paid around 170 euros for the boiler. If you didn't see how bad was the boiler of my old Gaggia Classic 2006 when I bought it second hand, check this card here. I really don't like this tear down for the scaling. The chances of messing up with other components is not small. And in terms of longevity, for people who like things that last forever, I think Gaggia made a major improvement here. Switching gears to temperature, we can imagine that a boiler that is 2 times heavier and more dense will store more energy and then will be more stable temperature-wise. According to Hole at Love, the internal volume also increased from 108 to 136 mils. It's a 25% increase, and It helps with the temperature stability, but I think it's going to be especially useful for the people who like to steam milk, because you will have 20% more volume for steam to be available. If you saw the video from Whole Lot Love, it confirms that the temperature stability improved, but I wanted to test myself, and compared to my Gaggia Classic 2006, I'm using the same methodology. You can check for more detailed information in my temperature surfing video, but basically I replaced the steam thermostat by a Thermocouple Type K, and I'm using the PID only as a thermometer to check the temperature. I set the offset to 0, so I have the real temperature in the boiler, and I'm taking notes and putting a graphic for us to analyze later. But the temperature in the boiler is different than the temperature in the puck. Then I also measured the temperature in the puck when the light was going off, when the light was going on, and in the peak temperature that the machine was achieving, so that I could make a correlation between the temperature in the boiler and the temperature in the puck. And the method is the same. I used real coffee, 19 grams in, 40 grams out in 25 seconds, using a thermometer with a Thermocouple Type K in the portafilter to make the measurements. And in case you want to replicate this experiment, make the same tests in your machine, I'll leave a link for this thermometer and the thermocouple in the description. And what we are gonna see in those measurements. The light goes off when the boiler achieves 103 degrees, meaning that the heating element is being activated to heat up the water. Then when it achieves 104 degrees, it will stop delivering energy to the heating element. The light will go on, meaning that the machine is ready to brew. However, there's an inertia in the system. The water will continue heating for a while, and it's going to achieve 118 degrees. Then I took the measurements of the temperature in the puck in those three situations. So when the light goes off, the temperature starts at 97.2 degrees, it decreases to 96.1, and then it goes up back again to 97.6. So it's just 1.5 degrees difference between the maximum and the minimum. In this test, I extracted 38.3 grams in 27 seconds, but the result is amazing, super stable, equivalent to the test that I did with a PID in my Ranchillo Silvia. Then I did the same at 118 degrees. So the temperature initially was at 102.1. It decreased to 99, so 3.1 degrees difference. Very stable as well, but super hot. Maybe if you have a fermented coffee, you may give it a go, but I think it's too hot. Then the third test was when the light goes on, and it started at 98.7, decreased to 95 degrees, so 3.7 degrees difference between maximum and minimum, which is still excellent. And this was a bit astonishing to me. The temperature drop can be as small as 1.5 Celsius degree if you start to brew when the light goes off, or 3.1 if you start at the peak temperature, or 3.7 if you start when the light goes on. It's even better than the 4.3 that I achieved with my Gaggia Classic with PID, or 5 degrees with the thermostat. Will it change your life? No, but maybe you will decide to install a thermometer instead of a PID, because the problem is knowing the starting point, and in this narrow band you can minimize your error. Then if you don't need a lot of precision, a thermometer can be enough, maybe less convenient, but sufficient. And maybe I should finish the installation of the PID and check how it performs. What do you think? But let me share some other interesting conclusions with you. In this graph, we have in red the temperature in the boiler, and in blue the temperature in the puck. The temperature in the puck was adjusted, okay? When you see 97.2 is the starting point when the light goes off, 98.7 when the light goes on, 102.1 when the temperature is the peak, which is 118 degrees in the boiler. So those are the measurements that I made with the thermocouple in the portafilter. These numbers are always the starting temperature. And here we have a little bit of noise because the temperature is not stable. So I couldn't assume that the starting point here would be also 97.2. So I made some adjustments, but it's more for visualization purposes. We're not going to consider those data because it's not correct. And what interests us most is the temperature after stabilization, which happens around 10 minutes according to my tests. So first, relevant information. If you're surfing the temperature, you can have those information in mind. Light goes off, you have maybe 14 seconds to increase a bit the temperature by 1.5 degrees. The initial temperature in your puck. Then you have up to 25 seconds to start extracting between 98.7 and 101.2 degrees. Another thing that we can observe if we want to surf is that the temperature has much less variation when the light goes on and off. But when the light goes off, the heating element is triggered, and the inertia will lead the boiler to heat much faster than the water. Then we have a much higher difference here than in the lights on and off situation. The good news is that if you're trying to guess and you are within this band, your error will be by no more than 5 degrees. But you can try to work with those times to increase or decrease the temperature within this band, and you can also flush to maybe start at a lower temperature if you think that your coffee is getting too bitter. Another comment that I would make is that with this data and the correlation that you can see between the real temperature in the puck and the temperature in the boiler, you can install a thermometer with a Thermocouple type K in your boiler. You can use a hole washer probe. You don't need to remove the steam thermostat, and then you will see those measurements in your boiler. With that, you can surf the temperature with much more precision, and you may not even need a PID for that. However, the PID is more convenient. Another thing that you can observe is that here the temperature is much more stable, and it happens after 12 minutes. Here the instability is much greater because the boiler is getting heated. So I would start to brew in this phase after the 10 minutes than before. If you look here, this is how long the light will be on, which means how long the machine is ready to brew. And it was 4 minutes and 47, 46 and 48 seconds. Then to this side you have a greater variation, still acceptable I would say, and it's a bit disguising, okay, because the numbers show that it can be better. However, I also measured the temperature after preheating the machine for only 10 minutes. When the light went off in the first opportunity after 10 minutes, I took the measurements and it was pretty okay, as we can see here. I started my shot without pre-flushing exactly at 10 minutes and 38 seconds. The initial temperature after stabilizing after 5 seconds was 94.1 and the minimum was 91.6 degrees. It's only 2.5 degrees difference in 25 seconds. 19 grams in, 39 grams out. And for the majority of the beans, this temperature will be perfectly okay, in my opinion. And when I said that it's not only the boiler, this stability is not only because we have more volume and because we have brass that is heavier and more dense than aluminum. If you see here, the lights are going on and off exactly at 103 and 104 degrees. So the thermostat is being activated at those temperatures, which means that Gaggia introduced a new thermostat here. In my old Gaggia Classic, these temperatures were 103 and 107. Now they put a thermostat that is much more precise. The consequence is that the peak is not 126 degrees anymore in the boiler, and this on and off means that the heating element is activated for a shorter period of time, and then you have more stability, you have less amplitude in the temperature in your boiler, and as a consequence in your water. And this is why this curve here is flatter than in my Gaggia Classic. This is why it's more stable. However, it's a bit hotter as well, and you may have to flush for a few seconds if you want to bring the temperature a bit lower. And I don't know if they introduced this 104 degrees thermostat in earlier versions. To my knowledge, no. But if your machine came stock with this thermostat, please let us know. It looks like a small detail that many didn't notice, but it's amazing. This combination of the brass boiler with the new thermostat is what allowed the temperature stability to be so good. And if you're still here and enjoying the content, don't forget to give your like. Thanks for watching.